The winter of 1979 in Moscow heralded the 1980 Olympics. The city buzzed with anticipation for the grand event. Shop windows gleamed, streets were cleared of undesirable elements, and triumphant marches about socialist achievements blared on the radio. But one only had to turn off the bustling avenues into the quiet Moscow courtyards, to the Stalin-era buildings with high ceilings and dark stairwells, to discover a completely different picture. There, justice was measured not by slogans, but by connections, and one call from the right office could turn a criminal into a victim, and a victim into nothing. In one of the elite special schools in the Central District, where the children of party nomenklatura, diplomats, and generals studied, a peculiar atmosphere reigned. Here they wore Montana jeans, smoked Marlboro in the restrooms, and were confident in the preordained nature of their future. MGIMO, foreign assignments, a Volga with a chauffeur. But in this school, there was one classroom where time seemed to stand still, the mathematics classroom on the third floor. Its mistress, Tatiana Ivanovna, was a woman over 60, thin, straight as a string, with an unchanging bun of gray hair pulled so tightly that the skin on her temples seemed stretched. She never raised her voice, never rapped the desk with a pointer. There was no need. When Tatiana Ivanovna entered the class, such a silence fell that one could hear the hum of the fluorescent lamp on the ceiling. They feared her. They feared her to the point of trembling knees, to cold sweat. Even the most notorious hooligans, children of ministers who could disregard the school principal, sat before Tatiana Ivanovna with their heads bowed. Why? No one could explain. There was something inhuman, cold, calculating in her gaze. She looked at the students not as children, but as equations, a set of variables x, y, superfluous terms. Few knew her biography. In her personal file, dry lines, 35 years of teaching experience, commendations, certificates, and only one line at the very beginning of her employment record, dated 1943, could clarify much. But no one looked into this record, and if they had, they would have learned that Tatiana Ivanovna, at 19, volunteered for the front and returned not merely as a communications operator or a nurse. She was a sniper. 34 confirmed kills. 4 Valor Medal, Order of the Red Star. The war taught her the main thing. The world is geometry, ballistics, wind, distance, lead. An error of 1 mm here at the rifle turns into meters of miss there at the target. You cannot make a mistake. A mistake is death. Friends, before we delve into this chilling story of how the past catches up with the present, I ask you to support our channel. Click the subscribe button and like this video right now. This helps us find and tell such forgotten, complex, and dramatic stories that were not written about in Soviet newspapers. Done? Thank you. Let's return to 1979. A girl named Nadia studied in Tatiana Ivanovna's class, an orphan raised by her grandmother, a cloakroom attendant. How did Nadia get into this elite school? Chance, a systemic error, or someone's one-time kindness? It no longer mattered. What mattered was that Nadia was an outcast. Poor dresses, remade from her grandmother's chests, worn-out shoes, and, most importantly, a limp. After a terrible accident that took the lives of her parents, one of Nadia's legs became 3 centimeters shorter than the other. She walked heavily, leaning on a cane that made a characteristic tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. This sound in the school corridors only elicited scornful smiles from the golden youth. "The cripple is coming," they whispered. "Hey, Nadia, Are you on a prosthesis or crutches today? But Tatiana Ivanovna singled out Nadia. No, not with grades. An A from the Iron Tatiana had to be fought for tooth and nail. She singled her out with her gaze. In this quiet, timid girl, the old teacher saw the same mathematical mind as her own. Nadia cracked logarithms like nuts. She saw beauty in integrals. She was the only one who wasn't afraid of Tatiana Ivanovna. Perhaps because Nadia reminded the teacher of another person, her own daughter, Mashenka, who died in distant 1953. Then, after Stalin's death and Beria's amnesty, a wave of crime swept the country. Masha, a 20-year-old student, was killed by a drunken company in a park, just for fun. The criminals were found, but it turned out that the gang leader was the son of some important official from the authorities. The case was hushed up, evidence disappeared, witnesses fell silent. Tatiana Ivanovna swallowed that pain then. She locked it deep inside, like a cartridge in a chamber. She had no strength to fight the system alone. She immersed herself in work, in numbers, in formulas. But, as we know, history has a way of repeating itself. In the 10th O class, there was an inseparable trio, the kings of the school. The first was Igor, the son of the district prosecutor, tall, stately, with the insolent smile of a man who had been told yes since birth. He wore imported corduroy jackets, and already at 16 had his own Zhiguli. The second was Sergei, the general's son, an athlete, a wrestler, a mountain of muscle and a complete lack of conscience. His father went through the war, but raised his son in the spirit of, "We are victors. Everyone owes us." And the third was Dima, the son of the director of a large defense plant, the brain of the company. Cynical, cold-blooded, one of those who likes to watch others torture a cat and offer advice. They considered themselves masters of life. Teachers turned a blind eye to their truancy. The school principal personally shook their hands, fawningly inquiring about the health of their fathers. They felt they were above the law, above morality. Nadia for them was not even a person, but an annoying misunderstanding that spoiled the appearance of their elite class. An object of ridicule, for a time. It all happened in late November. It was a dark, bleak evening. Snow and rain turned the Moscow streets into gray slush. Nadia stayed late at the library, preparing for the City Mathematics Olympiad. She left school almost at 8 p.m. Not a soul around. The streetlights, as if on cue, were out, a common occurrence at that time. She walked towards the bus stop, tapping her cane on the wet asphalt. Tap, tap, tap. It was cold and windy. A black Volga pulled up next to her. The window rolled down. The warm interior smelled of expensive tobacco and crêpe de chine musk. "Nadenka!" Igor shouted with feigned concern. "Why are you walking? The weather is not fit for flying. Get in. We'll give you a ride." Nadia quickened her pace. She knew that nothing good would come from them. "Thank you. I'll take the bus," she replied softly, not looking up. "Oh, don't be so stubborn." The door opened, and Sergei, huge as a wardrobe, blocked her path. "We're neighbors. It's on our way. Your grandmother is probably worried. Get in, we'll get you home in a flash." They didn't listen to her refusals. Sergei simply picked her up, light as a feather, and shoved her into the back seat. Nadia tried to scream, but Dima, who was sitting there, immediately clapped his hand over her mouth. "Quiet, quiet, honor student," he whispered in her ear. "Don't spoil our evening. We just want to go for a ride." The car sped off, but they didn't go to Nadia's house. They turned onto the highway leading to the departmental dachas. Friends, you can probably guess what happened next. But the most terrible thing in this story is not even the violence itself. The most terrible thing is the words. The words they spoke to her afterwards. When it was all over, in the empty, cold Dhaka house, amidst drunken laughter and the clinking of bottles, Igor, buttoning his shirt, threw 50 rubles in her face. A blue paper bill. An enormous amount of money for a schoolgirl. "Here, buy yourself new tights," he sneered, "and say thank you, you wretched thing. Who would even look at a cripple like you? We did you a favor. You felt like a woman for once." They threw her out of the car on the outskirts of the city, into the dirt, into the snow, without her cane. They had thrown it somewhere along the way, laughing at how funny she would hop without it. Nadia crawled to the nearest payphone for half an hour, in a torn coat, covered in blood, frozen. The next day, Tatiana Ivanovna came to class and saw an empty desk. The first desk by the window, the very one where Nadia always sat. The old teacher's heart skipped a beat. That same sniper's intuition. The shot was fired, the bullet was still flying, but you already knew it had hit. Nadia was gone for 3 days. And then Tatiana Ivanovna found out. She didn't find out from colleagues or from the principal. She went to her house. The door was opened by her grandmother, who had aged 10 years in those days. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. The apartment smelled of Validol and despair. Nadia lay on the bed, turned to the wall. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at the wallpaper with a glazed look. The same look Tatiana Ivanovna had seen hundreds of times at the front. The look of a person who had already died, but whose body for some reason continued to breathe. They said, the grandmother's whisper in the hallway was like thunder. They said that if we wrote a statement, if we said a word, Igor's father is a prosecutor. He said they would put Nadia in a mental hospital, that they would say she herself approached them, that she was abnormal. And me. They would fire me from my job and take away my apartment. "Tatiana Ivanovna, my dear, what should we do? We are small people." Tatiana Ivanovna listened, and with each word something clicked inside her, as if an invisible switch was being flipped. Click. Fear. Off. Click. Pity. Off. Click. Emotions. Off. On. Calculation. Wind. Distance. Target. She went into Nadia's room, sat on the edge of the bed, took her cold, lifeless hand in her own, dry and hot. "Nadia," she said in her usual school voice, strict and calm. "Look at me." The girl slowly turned her head. There was emptiness in her eyes. "Tatiana Ivanovna, I don't want to live. I feel dirty." "That's fixable," the teacher said sternly. "Dirt washes off. Wounds heal." They laughed. Nadia's lips trembled. "They said they wouldn't be punished, that they were the masters, that I was nobody." Tatiana Ivanovna squeezed her hand so hard that the girl winced. "Listen to me carefully, Nadezhda. In mathematics, there is a concept called error in the condition. If there is an error in the condition, the equation has no solution. They made a mistake. They thought you were just a zero, an empty space. But they forgot that you cannot divide by zero." She stood up, straightened her jacket. "You will live. You will finish school. You will enter an institute. And with this equation—" She paused for a second, and in her gray eyes flickered that same glint that the Germans saw in the crosshairs of her rifle in 43. I will deal with this equation myself. She left the apartment, and the tapping of her heels on the stairs sounded like metronome beats. That same evening, Tatiana Ivanovna opened the bottom drawer of her desk. There, under stacks of seventh-grade notebooks, lay an old, worn-out bundle. She unrolled it. Inside, there was no rifle. It was impossible to keep weapons at home. But there lay what she had kept as a memory: an officer's ruler, a notebook with ballistic tables, and a set of drawing instruments. Among the compasses and ruling pens lay it, a long steel needle, sharpened so that it could pierce a stack of paper without wrinkling it. She took the needle, checked the point with her fingertip. A drop of blood appeared. 3 targets, she whispered into the emptiness of her apartment. Distance close, wind correction, 0. She sat down at the table, took a clean sheet of paper, and wrote 3 names: Igor, Sergei, Dima. These were no longer students. These were targets. And the math lesson had just begun. What do you think, friends? Does a teacher, called to sow what is reasonable and good, have the right to take up the weapon of revenge? Write yes in the comments if you believe that evil must be punished at all costs, or no if you believe in the law. And we continue. Tatiana Ivanovna will begin her hunt. December 1979 wrapped Moscow in a thick gray blanket. The frosts were biting, -25 degrees Celsius. People moved in dashes from the metro to the entrance, hiding their faces in their collars. Perfect hunting weather. Snow hides tracks, and cold dulls vigilance. Tatiana Ivanovna was in no hurry. Sniper's patience, forged in the swamps near Leningrad in 43, dictated its rules. Haste is for amateurs. Before pulling the trigger, one must study the habits of the beast. She observed. At school, she now behaved differently. She became softer, smiled more often, but this smile did not reach her eyes. It was a disguise, the camouflage of a kind grandmotherly teacher. In her notebook with ballistic tables, a new section appeared. Schedule. Not of lessons, no. The schedule of the lives of the 3 executioners. Igor, the prosecutor's son, the leader, arrogant, loud. He couldn't be touched first. It would raise a ruckus. His father would turn the earth over. Sergei, the general's son, strength. Physically dangerous. He had to be approached carefully. Dima, the factory director's son, the brain, the weakest in spirit, but the most cunning. He planned their entertainment. He came up with an alibi. He was the ideal first target. Dima was going to enter Bauman Moscow Higher Technical School. He needed a perfect certificate. Mathematics was his only weakness. He understood it but was lazy, relying on Dad making arrangements. The plan matured instantly. A week before the final exam, Tatiana Ivanovna called Dima to the blackboard, gave him a difficult problem from the entrance exam program. Dima, smirking, went out, twirled the chalk in his fingers, and floated. "Sit down, Vlasov." "2," she said calmly, drawing a swan in the journal. "You'll get a C for the quarter. With such a grade, they don't take you to Bauman, even with your last name." After the lesson, Dima approached the teacher's desk. His arrogance diminished. "Tatiana Ivanovna, why are you doing this? Dad will be upset. Maybe I can fix it somehow." She looked at him over her glasses. Her gaze was assessing. "You can, Dima. There's no need to upset your dad. Come to my place tonight at 7. We'll do some extra work. If you pass the retake, I'll change your grade. Do you know the address?" He knew. Everyone knew she lived in an old general's house on the embankment, in an apartment inherited from her colonel husband. Exactly at 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Tatiana Ivanovna opened it. She was wearing a homemade knitted cardigan and soft slippers on her feet. The apartment smelled of old books, vanilla, and, faintly, Validol. "Come in, Dima. Want some tea?" "I wouldn't refuse some from the cold," the boy grumbled, entering the room. In his hands was a package, scarce Mishka Kosolopi, candies, and a jar of instant coffee. A bribe. The room was like a museum. Heavy curtains, a ticking grandfather clock, a huge oak table under a green lampshade. Cozy. Safe. Tatiana Ivanovna seated him at the table, placed a sheet with problems in front of him. "Solve them, and I'll make some tea. Our special herbal blend. It calms the nerves." In the kitchen, she took a small, unlabeled pharmacy bottle from the spice cabinet. In the 70s, strong drugs were hard to come by, but the old frontliner had connections at a military hospital. "For sleep, I suffer from insomnia," she complained to a familiar doctor. He prescribed a powerful neuroleptic in drops. Tasteless, odorless. 5 drops. Deep sleep, 10. Coma. She dripped 15. "Drink, Dima, drink," she said tenderly, placing a steaming cup of thin porcelain in front of him. The boy took a sip, winced. The tea was bitter, but he attributed it to the herbs. "Well, shall we begin with geometry?" she asked, sitting opposite him. "Yes, let's." Dima's tongue suddenly felt heavy. The letters in front of his eyes blurred. "It's a bit hot in here." 5 minutes later, his head dropped onto the oak table, right onto the problem conditions. Tatiana Ivanovna stood up, walked to the clock, and stopped the pendulum. The silence became absolute. Now she was not a teacher. She was a war surgeon. With difficulty, but confidently, the habit of dragging wounded from the battlefield showed. She dragged the limp body of the boy onto the sofa, laid him on his stomach, took off his fashionable imported sweater, pulled up his shirt. A young, healthy back. A straight, strong spine. She took the needle from the desk drawer, wiped it with alcohol. Her hands did not tremble at all. "In geometry, Dima, the most important thing is the point of intersection," she whispered, feeling for the right vertebra with her fingers. "The 4th cervical. If entered at an angle of 30 degrees, the spinal cord could be damaged without touching the artery." She knew anatomy perfectly. One precise blow, invisible, bloodless. The needle entered softly, like butter. Dima didn't even flinch. The neuroleptic had shut off all reflexes. She turned the instrument slightly, severing the finest nerve connections responsible for transmitting signals from the brain to the body, and pulled it out just as quickly. Only a tiny red dot remained on the skin, like a mosquito bite. By morning, it would disappear. The most difficult part was yet to come. She couldn't leave him here. Tatiana Ivanovna dressed him. Sweater, jacket, scarf. She hoisted his heavy body onto herself. My God, he was heavy. He had gotten fat on government rations. She dragged him out to the stairwell. The elevator wasn't working. A common occurrence. She had to drag him down the stairs from the 3rd floor. Her heart pounded, aching in her temples. But she didn't stop. For Nadia. For Masha. For everyone. She dragged him out of the entrance and sat him on a bench in a dark corner of the courtyard, slipped an empty vodka bottle, which she had prepared beforehand, into his hand, and unbuttoned his jacket. "Sit down! Cool off!" she threw out. Returning home, she washed the cup with soda, wiped the table with vinegar, and started the clock. The pendulum began its countdown again. Tick-tock, tick-tock. In the morning, the school was rocked by the news. Dima Vlasov was found in the courtyard of a house on the embankment. An ambulance took him away at 6 in the morning. The janitor thought he was a drunk who had frozen. But at the hospital, something terrible was discovered. He was alive. He was conscious. He understood everything. But he felt nothing below the neck. Doctors shrugged their shoulders. Spinal stroke. A very rare case. Possibly a reaction to alcohol and cold, or a spasm of blood vessels. Not a scratch or a bruise on his body. Only a small red dot on his neck that no one even noticed, mistaking it for a pimple. Tatiana Ivanovna began her geometry lesson precisely at 8:30. The class buzzed. Igor and Sergei sat pale, whispering. Silence. The teacher's voice cut through the hum like a knife through butter. Open your notebooks. The topic of the lesson is the irreversibility of vectors. She wrote formulas on the board, and the chalk did not crumble in her fingers. She knew. The first one was gone. 2 remained. But Dima was the smartest. Lying in the elite Kremlin hospital ward, staring at the ceiling, which would now be his only view for the rest of his life, he began to remember. The tea, the bitter taste, the words about the point of intersection. He tried to tell the doctors, his mom, his dad. His lips moved. He could speak. The teacher, it was her, the needle. But you know what his father, the factory director, replied? Dimka, what nonsense are you talking about? What teacher? You have toxic brain damage from surrogate alcohol. The doctors said so. You drank some crap. Better keep quiet. Don't embarrass me in front of the commission. No one believed him, because evil committed by quiet people always seems incredible. But Igor and Sergei, they didn't believe immediately. But fear, a sticky animal fear, began to creep into their souls. What do you think, friends? Does a person who is used to controlling the destinies of others feel when they realize that they themselves have become a target? And why do parents, instead of listening to their children, often choose the truth that is convenient for them? Write your thoughts, and we will move on to the most difficult stage. After all, eliminating the leader, Igor, the prosecutor's son, will be much more difficult. He has already sensed something is wrong. January 1980 was a difficult month. After the New Year holidays, Moscow plunged into a gray, viscous depression. Tinsel was put away. Christmas trees shed their needles in garbage dumps. And at the school where Tatiana Ivanovna worked, an atmosphere reigned that could be cut with a knife. The mysterious illness of Dima Vlasov, which turned a flourishing young man into a talking head, frightened everyone. But most of all, it frightened 2 people, Igor and Sergei. Igor, the prosecutor's son, became jumpy. He constantly looked over his shoulder, stopped being rude to teachers, and sat in class clutching his desk with whitened fingers. His father, pulling all his strings, thoroughly investigated Dima's case. The doctor's verdict was unambiguous and vague, spinal stroke of unclear etiology. No criminal involvement. An accident. His body just couldn't take it. But Sergei reacted differently. The general's son, a wrestler, a wardrobe with a mezzanine, accustomed to solving problems with his fists, felt like a cornered animal. He didn't believe in strokes. His animal intuition, the very same that helped him win in the ring, whispered, "There's a predator nearby." But who? He looked at his classmates, at the teachers, at the cleaners, and saw no threat. Tatiana Ivanovna, to him, was just an old clothes hanger. A math teacher, dust under his feet. Could dust break a bear's spine? Sergei started drinking. He drank heavily, secretly from his general father, stealing cognac from the home bar, buying port wine from taxi drivers. Alcohol dulled his fear, but inflamed his aggression. Tatiana Ivanovna observed him through the glass of her office. She saw how his gait changed, how his huge hands trembled, how he lashed out at first graders, giving them slaps on the back of the head in the corridor. "Strength without brains," she said quietly, wiping the blackboard. "Newton's second law. The force of action is equal to the force of reaction. But if you hit a fulcrum, strength turns into weakness." In her notebook, next to Sergei's name, an annotation appeared. Garage Cooperative Strela, Box 114, Wednesday, Friday. In the Soviet Union, a garage was not just a place to store a car. It was a men's club, a refuge, a fortress. Sergei spent his evenings there. He was supposedly preparing his father's Volga for a technical inspection, but in reality, he locked himself inside, turned up the Vesna tape recorder to full volume, and drank, looking at the polished hood of the car that was supposed to be his on his birthday. Friday, January 25th. Tatiana Ivanovna dressed warmly. Under her old coat, a wool sweater on her feet, felt boots with galoshes, so her steps would be silent. In her pocket, the usual set: a needle, alcohol, gloves. She knew Sergei would be more difficult than Dima. He couldn't be put to sleep with tea. She couldn't approach him with an offer to retake a test. He would curse her out. He had to be outsmarted, his own instincts used against him. The garage cooperative was on the outskirts of the district, beyond the heating pipe, a labyrinth of rusty iron gates and brick walls. The streetlights never worked here. The snow between the rows was packed down by car tires. Tatiana Ivanovna walked, blending into the shadows, a sniper in the city. She wasn't afraid of the dark. Darkness had been her ally since '43, Box 114. A dim light seeped through the cracks in the gate. Heavy bass thumps could be heard. Western rock was playing. Tatiana Ivanovna approached the small wicket gate in the main gate. It wasn't locked. Sergei was waiting for his buddies, who promised to bring more booze. She pushed the door and entered. The smell of gasoline, old rubber, and stale alcohol hit her nose. Sergei stood with his back to her, leaning over the open hood of the Volga. He was fiddling with something with a wrench, swearing under his breath. His broad back, covered by a telnyashka he liked to impersonate a paratrooper, was a perfect target. But he was huge. If she missed, if her hand trembled, he would turn around and break her in half with one blow. "Sergei," she called softly. The boy started so violently that he dropped the wrench. The sound of metal hitting concrete rang out like a gunshot. He spun around sharply. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot, his fists clenched reflexively. Seeing the dry, frail figure of the teacher in front of him, he paused for a second. Then a malevolent smirk twisted his face. "You! What are you doing here, you old hag? Spying on me?" Tatiana Ivanovna stood calmly, her hands in her pockets. "I was visiting the caretaker, Mikhalich, for potatoes. I hear music playin', light on. Thought I'd drop by. Sergei, you should turn down the music. The police will come." "Get out!" he roared, taking a step towards her. "Get out of here before I give you crutches, you damn teacher. Teach your math in school." He was drunk and aggressive. This was bad. He was coming at her. Tatiana Ivanovna feigned fright, stepped back, tripped over a canister near the entrance. "Oh!" she cried out, clutching her heart. "Oh, I feel ill. Sergei, help! My pills are in my bag." She began to sink to the floor right next to the workbench, littered with tools. Instinct. A strange thing. Even in a scoundrel like Sergei, a reflex kicked in. Not pity, no, fear. If the old hag kicked the bucket in his garage now, it would be jail time. His father would kill him. "Damn it!" he swore. "Just don't die here." He rushed to her, bent down to grab her by the collar and shake her, bring her to her senses. This was a mistake, a fatal mistake. As he bent down, his neck became exposed, tense, but exposed. He loomed over her, blocking the light from the lamp. At the moment his hand reached for her, Tatiana Ivanovna ceased to be a helpless old woman. The movement was lightning fast, from bottom to top. With her left hand, she grabbed his wrist, using the inertia of his own movement, and pulled him towards her, forcing him to lose his balance and lurch forward. And her right hand, in which the steel needle was already clasped, struck. Not just a prick. It was a precise, calculated blow to the base of the skull, where the atlas connects to the cranium. A crunch. Barely audible, sickening crunch. Sergei froze. His eyes widened in surprise. He opened his mouth to scream, to strike, to tear her apart. But his body did not respond. The huge mountain of muscle suddenly became a useless sack of bones. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the dirty concrete floor of the garage, face down in an oil stain. He was conscious. He saw everything. He saw how the dying old woman easily, athletically, got up from the floor, dusted off her coat, straightened her glasses. She leaned over him. Now their faces were close. He saw every wrinkle, every pore on her face, and that same icy sniper's glint in her eyes. "Quadriplegia," she said calmly, as if lecturing at the blackboard. "That's when both your arms and legs give out. You were strong, Seryozha. You were proud of your strength. You used it to break others, to drag a disabled girl into a car, to hold her while she cried." Sergei tried to grunt. Saliva dribbled from the corner of his mouth. Primal terror splashed in his eyes. He understood. Life ended right here, on the concrete floor. "Now your strength will be your prison," she continued in a whisper. "You'll feel your nose itch, but you won't be able to scratch it. You'll want to drink, but you'll wait until someone brings you a glass. You'll become as helpless as Nadia was that evening. Only Nadia will get up and walk, and you won't." She straightened up, looked around, took a half-empty vodka bottle from the table, splashed some on his clothes, poured the rest nearby, creating a puddle. She threw the bottle so it would look like he had fallen on it. A picture perfect. Got drunk, slipped, hit his neck on the workbench or car bumper. A domestic injury. "Goodbye, Seryozha. You didn't solve the problem." She left the garage, closing the wicket gate tightly behind her. The music continued to play. Boney M. Rasputin. A cheerful rhythm for the end of a life. Sergei was found only a day later. His father became worried and sent the driver. At Burdenko Hospital, the best neurosurgeons scratched their heads. Amazing, Comrade General. Compression injury, pinpoint damage to the spinal cord, as if pierced by an awl. But the skin is intact, only a hematoma. Apparently, he fell on some sort of pin or the corner of a workbench. An unfortunate fall. One chance in a million. "Will he walk?" the general roared. "No, never. He won't even be able to hold a spoon." When the news reached the school, the effect was like a vacuum bomb explosion. The second one. Two of the trio with the same diagnosis. Accident? Coincidence? A deathly silence hung over the classroom. No one laughed. No one ran. Students exchanged glances, afraid to voice what everyone was thinking. This was retribution. But most of all, Igor was terrified. Left alone, the gang leader, the prosecutor's son, realized the noose was tightening. He didn't go to school. He locked himself in his room, drew the curtains. He armed himself with his father's hunting knife. He knew he was next, but he didn't know where the blow would come from. That evening, the phone in Tatiana Ivanovna's apartment rang. "Hello," she answered. There was heavy, ragged breathing on the line, and then Igor's hysterically cracking voice. "I know it's you. Hear me, you. I know. I'll tell my father everything. They'll shoot you. I'll kill you myself if you come near." Tatiana Ivanovna listened silently to his shouts. Not a muscle twitched on her face. She waited for him to run out of breath. "Igor," she said quietly, when the stream of threats had subsided. "You forgot the rules of geometry." "What rule?" he shrieked. 3 points define a plane. We've already set 2 points. The third remains, and you won't be able to avoid it, because the plane already exists." She hung up. The hunt was entering its final, most dangerous phase. The beast was cornered, armed, and knew the hunter by sight. Now, the margin for error had completely disappeared. Friends, what do you think? Is what Tatiana Ivanovna is doing just? Or does no one have the right to take the law into their own hands, even if the law is silent? Write your opinion. And most importantly, how would you deal with Igor? After all, he knows who is hunting him, and he has the power of his father. Will a simple teacher be able to outmaneuver the system? We will find out next. February 1980. Moscow was preparing for another plenum of the Central Committee, and in the apartment of District Prosecutor Vitaly Petrovich, a drama worthy of Shakespeare was unfolding. Igor, recently the king of the school and master of life, had turned into a shadow. He barricaded himself in his room, hung blankets over the windows, and flinched at every phone call. He slept with a knife under his pillow. He stopped washing, shaving, and going outside. "It's her!" he screamed at his father when the latter tried to drag him out of the room. "Dad, you don't understand. She got Dima. She broke Sergei. She's coming for me. She's a cursed sniper witch." Vitaly Petrovich, a heavy-set man with a stern gaze and a habit of resolving matters with a single phone call, looked at his son with disgust. "Do you hear yourself?" his bass boomed. "A sniper? A math teacher? She's 65 years old. You're a healthy bull, scared of an old woman. Or did you drink too much of that swill from your buddies?" "Dad, check on her," Igor pleaded, grabbing his father by the lapels of his imported jacket. "Pull up her dossier. She's not a simple teacher, she's a killer." The prosecutor, of course, didn't believe the nonsense about a ninja pensioner. To him, the situation looked different. The boys had overdone it, drank too much bad vodka. One got a stroke, the other broke his neck while drunk. It happens. But his only son's hysteria was irritating. And to calm his air, and at the same time show who was in charge of the district, Vitaly Petrovich decided to act. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Invite citizen." He glanced at a piece of paper. "Smirnova Tatiana Ivanovna for a conversation." The prosecutor's office smelled of expensive leather, party cloth, and fear. This smell had permeated the walls for decades. Fates were broken here. Sentences were signed here. Tatiana Ivanovna entered quietly. In her unchanging old coat, with a string bag in her hands, wearing thick glasses. She looked pathetic. A typical Soviet pensioner, bent double by life. The prosecutor didn't offer her a seat. He leafed through a folder on his desk for a long time, deliberately ignoring the visitor. A psychological attack. Finally, he looked up. Tatiana Ivanovna Smirnova, born 1915, higher education. Awards. Many. Medal for Valor. A sniper then. Tatiana Ivanovna adjusted her glasses with a trembling hand. It was a while ago, Vitaly Petrovitch. A long time ago. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I'm getting cataracts. And my hands. Arthritis bothers me. It's hard to hold chalk at the blackboard, let alone a rifle. The prosecutor smirked. Before him stood a ruin, a harmless old woman, and his son was afraid of this creature. My son Igor claims you threatened him, said something about geometric figures, about points. What do you say? Threatened? Tatiana Ivanovna was genuinely surprised. My goodness, Igor is a capable boy, but he's neglected his geometry. I told him that 3 points define a plane. It's an axiom, 7th grade. Did he really take that as a threat? Perhaps the boy is suffering from nervous exhaustion before his exams. He could use some valerian drops. She spoke so softly, so convincingly, that the prosecutor felt like an idiot. To summon a war veteran, a distinguished teacher, because of the ravings of a deranged teenager. But the official's instinct demanded a conclusion. He stood up, towering over the desk like a huge block. Listen here, Citizen Smirnova. I don't know what your teaching methods are, but if you ever approach my son again, if you even look at him sideways, I will not just fire you, I will have you imprisoned. We'll find a charge. I have long connections. Do you understand me? Tatiana Ivanovna lowered her eyes. I understand, Vitaly Petrovitch. No more lessons. I was just about to write a request for sick leave. My heart is bothering me. I'll go to my dacha. I need fresh air. That's excellent, the prosecutor barked. Go, and don't let your presence be felt in the city until Igor finishes school. You're free. She left the office, shuffling her feet, but as soon as the heavy oak door closed behind her, the shuffling stopped. Her back straightened. In her eyes, hidden by thick lenses that were actually plain glass, her eyesight was perfect. A cold fire flickered. Error in calculations, Comrade Prosecutor, she whispered. You think power is a shield, but power is just a bigger target. That same day, Tatiana Ivanovna wrote a leave of absence request without pay, citing health reasons, and disappeared. Her apartment was locked. Her phone was unanswered. Neighbors said they saw her leave on an electric train with a suitcase, heading towards the region. For Igor, this was an all-clear signal. See? His father said proudly at dinner. I told you, I just scared her. And she ran away, tucked her tail between her legs and fled to her village. No one will touch you. I'm the prosecutor. Who would go against me? Igor's fear began to recede. Day after day, week after week. The math teacher was gone. No one called, no one watched. Friends, new hangers-on who replaced the paralyzed Dima and Sergei, started inviting him out again. Alcohol and youth took their toll. By the end of February, Igor decided, I got away with it. Dad is right. It's just a coincidence. The old woman got scared. He started going to school again, got back behind the wheel of his Jiguli. Life was getting back to normal. He even started to forget Nadia's face, that crippled girl. Who was she? Dust. And he was a winner. March 1980, Saturday. Igor's parents went to their dacha to friends to celebrate an award of another rank. The apartment, a huge three-room apartment in the center, was entirely at Igor's disposal. He decided to throw a party to celebrate his liberation. The apartment hummed with music, cigarette smoke, scarce alcohol, girls from the parallel class. Igor was on a roll. He danced, drank cognac straight from the bottle, and screamed Vysotsky's songs, feeling immortal. "To hell with all of you!" he shouted out the open window. "I'm Igor. I'm the king." By 2 in the morning, the guests had left. Some took taxis, others passed out in the living room. Igor was left alone in the kitchen. His head was spinning. He felt good. The fear had completely gone. He walked to the faucet to get some water. Thirst tormented him terribly. The apartment was quiet. Only the water dripping from the faucet and the hum of the Zill refrigerator. Igor took a sip, closed his eyes, and leaned his back against the countertop. Click. The sound was quiet, barely audible. That's how a front door lock clicks when it's opened with a professional lockpick, or when someone has a key. Igor opened his eyes. He thought he imagined it. He listened. Silence. But the silence had changed. It became dense, heavy, like before a thunderstorm. He went into the hallway. "Hey, who's there? Dad, are you back?" No one answered, but the front door was ajar. A draft blew in from the stairwell. The drunkenness instantly evaporated. Cold sweat broke out on his back. That same animal terror he had been suppressing for a month returned with renewed force. "Who's here?" His voice cracked into a screech. He backed away into his room. The knife was under his pillow, his only defense. He rushed into the room, slammed the door, and with trembling hands turned the latch. He darted to the bed, shoved his hand under the pillow. Empty. The knife wasn't there. Igor froze. He knew for sure he had put it there that morning. He checked it every day. He slowly turned around. In the corner of the room, in a deep armchair, hidden in the shadow of the thick curtains, someone was sitting. Looking for this? A quiet, calm voice. A voice that haunted his nightmares. A hand emerged from the shadow. The blade of a hunting knife gleamed in her hand. His knife. Tatiana Ivanovna sat with her legs crossed. She was not in a homemade cardigan or an old coat. She was wearing a black turtleneck, black trousers, and thin leather gloves. Her hair was tucked under a black cap. No glasses. Her gaze was clear, hard, sharp. How did you get in?" Igor whispered, sliding down the wall. "There's security here, a concierge, a lock." "Locks are for honest people, Igor," she chuckled. "And Uncle Vasya the concierge loves to sleep after his shift, if you treat him to some stolichnaya with dimedrol." She stood up slowly, gracefully. There was nothing old about her movements. It was a predator moving. "Your father told me to leave. I left, but he didn't specify where. I just moved into the attic of your building. 3 days, Igor. I lived above your head for 3 days. Studied your schedule, listened to your music, waited for your parents to leave to celebrate." Igor tried to scream, but his throat seized up. "No," he croaked. "I'll do anything. I'll give you money. Dad will put you in jail." Tatiana Ivanovna shook her head, approaching him. She held the knife not like a kitchen utensil, but like a weapon of war. But in her other hand, something else gleamed. Thin, long, steel. Your dad thinks he's the law, and you think you're an exception to the rules. But in math, Igor, there are no exceptions. There's only a consequence. She tossed the knife aside. She didn't need it. It was just a psychological trick to break his will. The needle. She only needed the needle. Dima and Sergei have already solved their equations. The answer was zero. Zero movement, zero future. Now it's your turn. You're the leader, Igor, the ringleader. So your problem will be harder. Igor, cornered between the wardrobe and the bed, suddenly remembered his father's words. Be a man. A desperate rage awoke in him. He was a young, healthy guy. She was an old woman, even a sniper, but an old woman. Die, you bitch! He screamed and lunged at her, trying to knock her down, punch her, strangle her. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. An attack on a sniper in close combat. Inertia, the opponent's weight. Dodging. Tatiana Ivanovna did not block the blow. She simply stepped aside, crouching slightly, letting his bulky figure pass by her. And at that moment, as he flew past, revealing his unprotected back. No, this time everything went wrong. Igor, drunk and clumsy, tripped over the rug. He didn't just fall, he crashed with his full weight onto a low coffee table with a glass top. The sound of breaking glass deafened the room. Igor lay among the shards, motionless. Tatiana Ivanovna froze. She walked over to him. A huge, sharp shard of thick glass protruded from his neck, right under his ear. The carotid artery. Blood spurted in a dark, powerful fountain, soaking the expensive Persian rug. This was not part of her calculations. She needed paralysis. She needed a life in the prison of his own body, not a quick death. Igor gurgled, clutching the wound with his hands, looking at her with a fading gaze. In his eyes was the question, help. Tatiana Ivanovna stood over him. Two people wrestled within her. The medic engineer, who had taken the Hippocratic oath, who was obliged to save, and the mother, whose daughter was killed by the same scoundrels 25 years ago, and the teacher, whose student was broken and thrown into the snow. Blood flowed, seconds ticked away. If she pressed the artery now, called an ambulance, he would survive. His father would cover for him. He would get off scot-free and live, laugh, have children. And Nadia would limp all her life. Tatiana Ivanovna slowly took off her gloves, looked at her watch. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Then she walked to the phone on the bedside table and pulled the cord from the socket. Error in the condition, Igor, she said softly, watching life leave the prosecutor's son's body. The problem has no solution. She sat down in the armchair and waited. Waited for the fountain to turn into a trickle, and the trickle into a puddle. Death came in 3 minutes. Friends, Tatiana Ivanovna faced the most terrible moral choice: to save an enemy or to allow ultimate deadly justice to take its course. Did she have the right to inaction? After all, she didn't actually kill him. It was an accident, but she didn't save him. Write in the comments whether she became a murderer at that moment, or if it was the hand of fate. And ahead of us is the denouement. The prosecutor father will return home, and a hunt will begin in which only one will remain alive. March 1980. Night. The black Volga of prosecutor Vitaly Petrovich softly rustled its tires on the fresh snow, turning into the courtyard of the elite building. The interior smelled of expensive French perfume, Climat, and Armenian cognac. Vitaly Petrovitch and his wife, a stout lady in a mink coat, were returning from the anniversary of an MVD general. They were cheerful, relaxed, and absolutely confident in the future. "Vitalik, did you see how Petrov looked at my necklace?" his wife chirped, adjusting her hairstyle in the rearview mirror. "He was so envious, and I got it through the warehouse manager." "Calm down, Lyusha," the prosecutor chuckled amiably, getting out of the car. "You are supposed to shine. You are the prosecutor's wife." They rode the elevator up, humming a tune. Vitaly Petrovitch took out his keys, but the door was unlocked. "Igorek, forgot to lock again?" he shouted loudly, entering the hallway. "How many times have I told you? Times are uneasy now." There was no answer. The apartment was dark and quiet. Too quiet. Only somewhere deep in the rooms, water dripped monotonously. "He's probably asleep." His wife waved her hand. "He had a good time with friends. I'll go check." She shed her fur coat and tiptoed into her son's room. Vitaly Petrovitch remained in the hallway, unlacing his boots. 1 second, 2, 3, and then the silence of the night house was ripped apart by a scream. It was not just a scream, it was a howl, an animalistic, guttural howl of a female who had seen the death of her young. Vitaly Petrovitch rushed into the room, knocking over a floor lamp on the way. The light from the corridor fell in a strip on the carpet, on that very Persian carpet they had brought from a business trip to Iran. Only now the pattern on it was invisible. It was covered in black, thick, already congealing liquid. Igor lay in the center of this puddle, his head unnaturally twisted. Shards of glass around him sparkled like diamonds. His face was white as chalk, and his eyes stared at the ceiling with an expression of frozen horror and a silent question. "Igor! Igoryusha!" The mother crawled on the carpet, staining her hands and dress with blood, trying to lift her son's heavy, cold head. "Get up! Dad, do something! Call an ambulance!" "An ambulance?" Vitaly Petrovitch froze. His brain, accustomed to analyzing facts, working with criminal cases and corpses, refused to accept the image. This cannot be his son. This is some victim from case number. But the smell of blood, metallic, sweetish, hit his nose, bringing him back to reality. He rushed to his son. Feeling for a pulse was pointless. The body was cold. "Don't touch anything," he barked at his wife, grabbing her by the shoulders and pulling her away from the body. "Get out! Get out of here!" He professionally inspected the scene. The broken table, skid marks on the carpet, the nature of the wound on the neck. "An accident," flashed through his mind. Drunk, tripped, fell. Glass severed the carotid artery. Death occurred in 3 to 4 minutes from acute blood loss. It was a terrible, absurd, tragic accident. No crime, no murder. Fate, any other investigator would think. Vitaly Petrovitch reached for the phone on the bedside table to call the squad and the morgue van. His hand habitually rested on the receiver. He brought it to his ear. Silence. No dial tone, no rustle. He pressed the hook switch. Once, again. Silence. Damn. The connection's faulty, he thought, and looked at the cord. The cord snaked across the floor and went to the outlet behind the baseboard. Vitaly Petrovitch followed the black line with his gaze, and then his heart skipped a beat. The phone plug lay on the floor next to the outlet. It hadn't fallen out. It had been neatly removed and placed nearby. in an apartment where only his son lived, who was dying on the floor. Someone had unplugged the phone. The puzzle clicked into place instantly, like a rifle bolt. Yes, but he was alive after the fall. He could have survived if he had called, or if someone had called. But someone was here. Someone saw him fall. Someone walked to the phone and instead of dialing 03, pulled the cord. Someone stood and watched as life drained from his only son. Watched for 3 minutes and then left, leaving the door open. "Bitch!" the prosecutor gasped. His legs buckled and he collapsed to the floor beside the corpse. "That old witch!" The conversation in his office a month ago flashed in his memory. "In mathematics, Igor, there are no exceptions. There is only a consequence. Power is a bigger target." She hadn't run away. She hadn't been afraid. She had been here. Vitaly Petrovich looked up at the ceiling. He suddenly vividly imagined her sitting there, in the attic, or in the armchair in the corner, watching. Watching with her cold, faded sniper's eyes. An hour later, the apartment was full of people in uniform. But these were no ordinary policemen. It was the prosecutor's investigative team, the best of the best, summoned by the boss's personal alarm. "Seal off the district!" Vitaly Petrovich roared, his voice hoarse. "Check all attics, all basements, train stations, airports, a description of Smirnova Tatiana Ivanovna. Photo in her personal file at the school. Take her alive. Do you hear me? Alive! I myself. The particularly important case's investigator, Colonel Gromov, a family friend, led him aside. "Vitaly, calm down. We'll find her. But listen, it's clean here. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. The expert says, fall. The phone? Well, maybe Igor himself tripped over it when he fell." "You idiot!" the prosecutor hissed, grabbing the colonel by the lapels. "He's lying 2 meters from the outlet. He couldn't have tripped. She was here. She watched. This is murder. A particularly cynical murder by inaction." The search began that very night. Moscow was turned upside down. Wanted posters with the photo of the dangerous criminal, though formally there was nothing to charge her with, flew to all traffic police posts. They checked the school, checked her apartment. Empty. A layer of dust. They checked the dacha. Boarded up. The snow untouched. Tatiana Ivanovna disappeared. Like smoke in the wind. Like a ghost dissolving. She, who had been through the war, knew how to disappear through back alleys, how to change her appearance, how to throw dogs off the scent by sprinkling tobacco or pepper on her tracks. She hadn't left the city. Snipers don't run until the mission is complete. 3 days passed. Igor was buried. A closed coffin. An elite cemetery. A sea of wreaths from the city committee, regional committee, ministries. Vitaly Petrovich stood at the grave, black as the earth. His wife was on tranquilizers. Doctors supported her by the arms. People whispered, "Fate, destiny, curse." No one knew the truth. The official version was a tragic accident. But Vitaly Petrovich knew. And when he returned home after the wake, to the empty, quiet apartment, he didn't go to the bedroom, he went to his son's room. The carpet had been removed, the floor cleaned, but the smell of death still lingered in the air. He sat at Igor's desk, rummaging through his things, not knowing what he was looking for. Notebooks, cassettes, cigarettes. And suddenly, his gaze fell on a geometry textbook, lying on the very bottom shelf. An old, worn textbook for 7th to 9th grade. The prosecutor opened it. On the flyleaf, in neat teacher's handwriting, written in red pen, was Theorem proven, QED, and below it, the date. The date of Igor's death. The book hadn't been there before, he was sure. He had searched the room with experts. The book wasn't there. She had returned. She had returned to the apartment after the body had been taken away, or during the funeral when there was no guard. She had entered to leave this message, to finish him off, to show, "I can enter anywhere. I see you. I am nearby." Vitaly Petrovich dropped the book. His hands trembled so much he couldn't clench his fists. For the first time in his life, the master of the district, the prosecutor, the arbiter of destinies, felt absolutely, totally defenseless. He understood that the law he served and manipulated as he pleased did not work here. Against her, there were no articles of the criminal code, no detectives. She was an element, and she had left him to live with the realization that he had not saved his son, that he himself had provoked this by covering up the violence against that girl. "Nadia," he whispered, remembering the victim's name, the crippled Nadia. A plan, insane, desperate, formed in his head. If he couldn't find Tatiana Ivanovna, he had to find the one for whom she had done all this. A sniper always protects their position or their objective. Nadia was the key. If he found Nadia, he would lure out the teacher. But what would he do? Kill the girl? Imprison her? Vitaly Petrovich stood up, went to the safe, took out his awarded Makarov pistol, checked the magazine. "I'll find you, Tatiana," he said to the emptiness, "and we will talk not as a prosecutor and an accused, but as a father and a mother." Meanwhile, on the other side of Moscow, in a small apartment, Nadia's grandmother opened the mailbox. Inside was an envelope with no stamps, no return address. Inside was a savings passbook to bearer. On it was the sum of 5,000 rubles, an enormous amount of money, the cost of a Zhiguli car or a cooperative apartment. And a note. For the operation. In Kurgan, Elizarov's clinic performs miracles. Go immediately. Tickets have been bought. The train leaves tomorrow. Tatiana Ivanovna was not just avenging, she was saving. But did she know that the wounded beast, the prosecutor, had already picked up her trail, and that the next meeting would be the last for one of them? Friends, what do you think is more terrible for a parent, to lose a child, or to learn that you yourself were the cause of their death by raising a monster? And did the prosecutor act correctly by deciding to take the law into his own hands? Or should he have acknowledged his son's guilt? Write whose side you are on in this duel, and we are approaching the finale. March 1980. Kazan Station. Train stations in the Soviet Union were a special world. They smelled of coal smoke, fried pies, valerian, cheap tobacco, and anxiety. People met and parted here, they cried and laughed here. Here, they got lost in the crowd. The perfect place to disappear or to die. Vitaly Petrovich, the district prosecutor, knew it was pointless to search for Tatiana Ivanovna throughout the city. She was a ghost. But the ghost had a weakness, a human weakness that he, an experienced investigator, had unerringly calculated. A sniper does not abandon their own. If she saved Nadia, if she gave money for the operation, bank transfers were difficult to trace, but the bearer's savings book surfaced in a report when Nadia's grandmother went to withdraw part of the sum. Then she would oversee their departure. She would come to see them off. She would come to ensure the objective was safe. Vitaly Petrovich used his last trump card, telephone right. A call to the head of the transport police. Check the passenger lists for Kurgan. Last name. He gritted his teeth, remembering the name of that pitiful girl. Sinitsina Nadezhda, disabled, with an elderly woman. We have them, comrade prosecutor, they reported half an hour later. Moscow-Khabarovsk train. Departure tonight at 23:40. Fifth car. Lower berths. Vitaly Petrovich looked at his watch. 23 ma. He was alone. He hadn't taken the task force with him, hadn't taken a driver. This was personal. This was a blood feud. In his pocket, the standard Makarov, safety off, felt heavy. In another pocket, a photograph of his son, the Igor he remembered, cheerful, alive, in a school uniform. Not the one lying in blood. He drove his Volga, breaking all rules, speeding through red lights at empty night intersections. One thought pounded in his head. I will look into her eyes and ask if my son's life was worth the leg of that crippled beggar girl. The station hummed like a beehive, despite the late hour. Vitaly Petrovich, collar of his coat raised and hat pulled low over his eyes, pushed through the crowd of hawkers, business travelers, and gypsies. His eyes scanned the space. He wasn't looking for Nadia. He was looking for a tall, gaunt figure in an old coat. Platform number 4. The long green train was already at the station. Conductors in their uniform hats checked tickets. Steam billowed from beneath the wheels, creating a surreal haze. He saw them at the 5th carriage. Nadia, leaning on her grandmother and a crutch, slowly walked towards the vestibule. She looked frightened, glancing around. Her grandmother crossed herself, clutching a bag of belongings to her chest. Vitaly Petrovich stood behind a pillar. His heart pounded so hard it echoed in his ears. Where is she? Where's Tatiana? He looked around. Kiosk roofs, the station building windows, the overhead bridge. A sniper would take a high position, or one with the best view. And then he saw, neither on the roof nor on the bridge. She stood directly opposite, across the tracks, on the neighboring platform, hidden by the shadow of a freight car, standing motionless as a statue. She wasn't looking at Nadia. She was looking directly at him. She knew he would come. She was waiting for him. Vitaly Petrovich froze. Their gazes met across 2 sets of rails, through plumes of steam and human bustle. The distance, about 50 meters. She nodded almost imperceptibly, as if inviting him. Then she slowly turned and walked away from the station, towards the dead-end tracks where old carriages were stored. Into the darkness. The prosecutor looked at Nadia. The girl was already entering the carriage. The conductress was helping her with her crutches. He faced a choice. Approach Nadia, pull her off the train, cause a scene, intimidate her, vent all his pain on her. But why? She was just a pawn. She was a pretext. The real enemy was disappearing into the darkness. The one who killed his son. The one who challenged him. Vitaly Petrovich spat on the dirty asphalt. Well, come on, witch. Let's talk. He gripped the pistol in his pocket and followed Tatiana Ivanovna. The dead-end tracks of Kazan station were a labyrinth of rusty iron, creosote-smelling ties, and a deep, oppressive silence, broken only occasionally by the hoots of shunting locomotives. There were no streetlights here, no witnesses. Vitaly Petrovich walked cautiously, listening to every rustle. Snow crunched under his expensive boots. He lost sight of her. She dissolved into the labyrinth of carriages. "Tatiana!" he shouted, and his voice echoed off the metal sides. I know you're here. Come out. Or can you only cripple children from the shadows? Silence. Only the wind whistled in the wires. You killed my son, he roared, his voice breaking. You, old witch. He was just a boy. He stumbled, yes, but he didn't deserve to die. You made yourself a god. Who gave you the right? And who gave you the right? The voice came not from in front, nor from behind, but as if from everywhere at once. The acoustics of the dead end. Vitaly Petrovitch sharply turned, drawing his pistol. Come out! I'm here, Vitaly Petrovitch. She emerged from behind the wheel set of an old open-coach car, 10 meters from him. Her hands were empty, her coat unbuttoned. She wasn't hiding. Shoot, she said calmly. You have a pistol, don't you? Article 102, premeditated murder. Or will you frame it as during an arrest? The prosecutor raised his pistol, the front sight trembling. He just needed to pull the trigger, and it would all be over. Revenge would be exacted. But for some reason, he didn't shoot. Why didn't you save him? He choked out. I saw the book. You were there. You saw him die. Why didn't you staunch the wound? You're a doctor. You took an oath. Tatiana Ivanovna took a step forward. Under the light of a distant spotlight, her face seemed carved from stone. I took an oath, Vitaly, but I also took another oath. In 43, to defend the motherland from enemies. My son is an enemy? He roared. My Igorek is a fascist? He became one when he decided that some people were people, and others were biomass that could be raped, broken, and thrown out into the cold. You raised him that way. You taught him that Daddy would cover for him, that the law didn't apply to him. She spoke softly, but each word struck harder than a bullet. You say he stumbled? No, he crossed the line, thrice. With Dima, with Sergei, and with himself. You ask why I didn't save him? She stopped 5 meters from the gun barrel. Because if he had survived, he would have killed Nadia to silence the witness, or killed someone else a year later. Evil, feeling impunity, grows exponentially. I just cut off the graph. You're a monster, Vitaly Petrovitch whispered. Tears, angry, drunken tears, streamed down his cheeks. You're worse than them. You're a cold-blooded killer. Perhaps, she agreed. But Nadia is on a train now. She will live, she will walk, she will become a doctor or an engineer. She will have children. And your lineage? Your lineage is broken, Vitaly Petrovitch. And you are to blame. Shut up! He cocked the hammer. Shut up, witch! At that moment, a long, drawn-out horn of an electric locomotive sounded in the distance. The Moscow-Khabarovsk train moved off. The click-clack of the wheels began to pick up rhythm. Tatiana Ivanovna smiled. For the first time in a long time. Genuinely. Do you hear? That's the sound of life. My mission is complete. Vitaly Petrovitch stood with the pistol raised. Before him stood an old woman who did not fear death, who looked at the barrel as if it were a pointer. Two desires battled in his soul. To kill her, to splatter her against the wall of the carriage, to avenge his son, and another terrible, dark realization that she was right. That he, the prosecutor, the guardian of the law, had with his own hands created a situation in which vigilantism became the only form of justice. I'll put you in jail, he said, lowering the pistol. His voice trembled. You'll rot in prison. I'll make you beg for death every day. Unlikely, Tatiana Ivanovna shook her head. You wouldn't shoot an unarmed old woman, Vitaly Petrovitch. You're an officer, honor of the uniform and all that." She knew where to hit, but she was wrong about one thing. Vitaly Petrovitch was not just an officer, he was a father, driven mad by grief. "Honor?" He smirked crookedly. "What honor are you talking about when my son is being eaten by worms? I have no honor, and no uniform. There is only duty. To him." He raised the pistol again. This time his hand did not tremble. His eyes became empty, like Dima Vlasov's in the hospital ward. "Goodbye, Tatiana Ivanovna. The lesson is over." The shot in the dead end sounded unexpectedly muffled. It was drowned out by the thunder of a passing freight train. A flash illuminated the rusty walls of the cars, and two silhouettes for a fraction of a second. One of them swayed. Who fell into the snow? Who remained standing? Friends, we have reached the very edge. In this confrontation, there can be no winners. There are only losers. What do you think? Did the prosecutor pull the trigger, killing an unarmed woman? Or perhaps, at the last moment, his hand trembled? Or did Tatiana Ivanovna, the old sniper, foresee even this outcome? In the finale, we will find out how this duel ended and what became of those who survived. The shot rang out, but Tatiana Ivanovna did not fall. The bullet kicked up a fountain of ice chips and coal dust a meter from her feet. The echo of the shot bounced between the carriages, scaring away the crows. Vitaly Petrovitch stood with the pistol, now aimed at the ground. His hand, which had held the deadly metal, dropped limply. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the barrel. He had not missed. It was impossible to miss from 5 meters. He simply couldn't. In the last fraction of a second, as his finger already pressed the trigger, the prosecutor saw not the face of his dead son, but the face of that same girl Nadia, whom his Igorek, his pride, had thrown out into the snow like a broken doll. And he understood the terrible, destructive truth. If he killed this old woman now, he would finally turn into his son. He would become what Tatiana Ivanovna was protecting this world from. "Go," he choked out, not looking up. His voice was dead. "Go before I change my mind." Tatiana Ivanovna stood for another second. She expressed neither joy nor relief, only nodded, like a teacher accepting a correct but strained answer from a student. "Live with this, Vitaly Petrovitch," she said quietly. "This is your punishment, to live and remember." She turned and, slowly, without bending her back, walked into the darkness towards the long-distance tracks, where the lights of the semaphores flickered. The prosecutor watched her until her black figure finally dissolved into the night gloom. Then he unclenched his fingers. The Makarov pistol clanged dully on a railway tie. Vitaly Petrovitch sank into a snowdrift, covered his face with his hands, and howled. The Moscow-Khabarovsk train carried Nadia to a new life. She sat by the window, clutching her handbag to her chest, and watched the lights of the suburbs drift by. She didn't know what had happened in the dead end. She only knew one thing. Somewhere in that huge city, her guardian angel remained. An angel with the icy eyes of a sniper. Epilogue. The fates of the participants in this drama unfolded differently. Like lines on a graph that diverged in different directions after a bifurcation point. Igor, Sergei, Dima, 3 friends. Igor lay in a prestigious cemetery under a granite slab. Dima and Sergei remained alive, if you can call it life. Dima lived for another 5 years. He died in 1985 from congestive pneumonia, still unable to move an arm or a leg. His father, the factory director, became an alcoholic and was dismissed for embezzlement. Sergei, the general's son, proved to be the strongest. He lived with paralysis for 20 years. He saw the collapse of the USSR, saw the turbulent 90s, saw the world change. Looking out the window of his room, his parents died, and he was cared for by a nurse hired with his general's pension. It was said that before his death, he became very devout and asked for forgiveness from the icon hanging opposite his bed. Vitaly Petrovich, the district prosecutor, did not live long. 2 months after his son's funeral, he suffered a massive heart attack right in his office. He died instantly, clutching a pen in his hand. A resignation letter, which he never had time to sign, was found in his desk. The case of his son's death remained in the archives with the note, "Accidental death." Nadia. Nadezhda Sinitsina arrived in Kurgan. At the clinic of the brilliant Dr. Elizarov, she underwent 3 operations: apparatus, pins, pain, months of rehabilitation. But she stood up. She finished school, then medical institute, became a pediatrician. Did she return to Moscow? No, she stayed in the Urals, got married, and had 2 sons. She never told them what happened in 1979. But every year on May 9th, she set a table and placed an extra shot glass of vodka, covered with a piece of black bread. "Who is that for, Mom?" her children asked. "For a soldier," she replied, "who returned from the war to save me." Tatiana Ivanovna. She disappeared. The police searched for her half-heartedly. The prosecutor died. Igor's case was closed. There was no statement. Her apartment was broken into 6 months later. It was empty and clean, like an operating room. Rumors circulated that a similar woman was seen in a small village near Vladimir. She worked in the school library, lived reclusively, and communicated with no one. She died in 1991, quietly, in her sleep. When local residents came to bury her, they found a strange set of items in her bedside table: an old officer's ruler, a yellowed photograph of a young woman from the 50s, and a For Valor medal. There is no lavish monument on her grave, only a simple wooden cross and a plaque with her name. But every year on Teacher's Day, someone brings a bouquet of red carnations there. No one knows who does it. Perhaps former students, or perhaps fate itself pays tribute to the one who dared to correct an error in an equation at the cost of her own soul. Friends, this story is not a call to violence. It is an occasion to reflect on the fact that impunity breeds monsters, on the fact that justice is not always the law, and the law is not always justice, and on the fact that sometimes the quietest person in the room can be the most dangerous if what they hold dear is touched. In our time, such stories are becoming rarer. Or perhaps we simply stopped noticing them. If this story moved you, if it made your heart beat faster, support our channel, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Write in the comments whose side you are on in this story. Do you condemn Tatiana Ivanovna, or consider her a hero? Your opinion is very important to us. Thank you for being with us. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And remember, evil always comes back like a boomerang. Sometimes in the form of the law, and sometimes in the form of an old school teacher with a ruler in her hands. See you soon. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn. Enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.